So we sat with Psalm 80 on Sunday, and we made a couple of observations and a couple of kind of application points from that, if you would. And I'd just like to share those with you this morning. This would be good review if you were at Sunday service or if you were unable to attend and you missed out on it because of the live stream. This is going to be good for all of us. So the first observation we made was that lament is real. It's very honest. I described lament as putting our reality in front of God so that His light can shine on it. It's not about just complaining to God. It's not about, we just name our problems and then we can get over it. It seems to very seriously take that there's stuff wrong with the world. And sometimes that impacts our lives too, that there's stuff wrong in our lives. And it's putting that before God because God's the one who's made to handle it. We weren't made to handle the grief and the sorrow of this world. God created us for a relationship with Him and for that to be good and very good. But we kind of messed things up, is what our Christian narrative tells us, is that we messed everything up. And now all this evil, all the negative things in this world, the awful evils that take place in the world, as well as the ways that those impact us personally, that those weren't meant to be. That God intended us for something different. And that those things impacting our life, that's not what we were created for. So we weren't made to handle that. But we get to bring that to God in lament. And we get to share that with God and say, God, I wasn't made to handle this. Would you handle this with me? So our second observation was that abandoning lament is dangerous. This is something we have a tendency to do, is just to ignore or to push to the corner the things that are negative, either in our own life or in the world around us. But that's really a dangerous thing to do, because what I said is it makes reality and it makes our relationships really slippery. Because, we tend to, when we just ignore problems or we, try to handle them on our own, we make them way too big or way too small instead of seeing them how they really are in God's life or in God's light. The other thing is that our relationship with God begins to slip whenever we tell Him, look, here's the good part of my life. Here's the good part of my world. You're welcome here, God. But this negative part, this stuff that's not so good, God, I'd rather you just stay out of that. I don't want to share that with you. That's a dangerous place to be. Because what we can end up doing is saying that we have to clean all that up, all the bad stuff up, before we can bring it to Jesus. But the way Jesus modeled for us is that He brought together the sorrow, the suffering of this world. He suffered more than any of us could imagine with God's goodness and the hope of new creation, that Jesus brought those two together. So we don't need to hide those things from God. We don't need to hide those things from Jesus. Our final observation was that God can handle our lament. We looked at the Psalms, and as much as 2/3 or more of the Psalms are Psalms of sadness. Psalms of pouring out grief to God and sharing with God, why are things not the way they're supposed to be? Where are you, God? God can handle that. And this Psalm 80 particularly blames God for the circumstances that the psalm writer is going through. I think sometimes that's something we're afraid of, but that we need to acknowledge that God can handle. The psalmist sees that God is judging the evil in the world, and that because we are sinful and because we have done wrong, that sometimes judging evil in the world includes us. That our world is broken, it's suffering under the consequences of sin, and that our sin has broken it. God can handle our lament. So from those observations, we drew just a couple of ideas for application and next steps. We said that lament and longing help us to live in a world that is out of sorts. It can be so difficult, especially when there's the expectation of having everything together to live in a world that's just messed up. We look around the world and we see human trafficking, child slavery, unjust wars. We see depression and anxiety and an epidemic of loneliness. Lament roots us in hope and trust that God is working for good no matter what we say and no matter what we see. Our questions of God, where are you? What are you doing? Have you forgotten us? They don't go unnoticed. They are deeply seen and they are deeply cared for by a God who came and he suffered more than we could imagine. That is who Jesus was. So lament and longing, they help us to live in this world while we are waiting and longing for it to be set free from the curse of sin. Our other application was that lament equips us for ministry in this world of sorrow. The world is broken, and our sin has broken it. It was no small mistake, but it is the reason why God needed to come, is that we created evil in this world, and we brought this upon ourselves, and we weren't meant to handle it. When we return to lament, we take our pain, and we return to our purpose of living in relationship to God. And in that we find God is ready for us. He's showing us the way to live in our pain, the loneliness, and all those things. By lamenting and not ignoring these things, God's preparing us to be Jesus in these circumstances that we find ourselves in. I hope this message isn't one that's just received as we need to be sad. But I think this lament is meant to move us into hope and to move us into action. And that's what I had to share yesterday. We went into communion from there to share this shared meal and the hope of God who's still yet to come and to set all things right. But until we see each other next week, may you be blessed.